can't go through trauma without it showing up in your life. The truth always works, even if the other person doesn't listen. I agree with that at my soul. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another chapter of the Book of Sean. I'm excited to have you and be a part of this conversation tonight. Tonight, we have three extraordinary men on three very different journeys with very different conclusions and outcomes, but they all express the true measure of their greatness and their tenacity, not just to win, but to transform, to go from one state of living and being to another. And tonight, Malcom Glenn, Kevin Williams, and Ronald Eddington, all of them will comprise the full weight and tonnage of this conversation that I think will not just change your mind about a few things, but will inspire you to really think about how you can move from one stage of who and what you are to another. Before I bring up my first guest, Mr. Malcom Glenn in DC, let's talk about tonight. Let's talk about the debate. Let's talk about what we hope for. Listen, Kamala Harris is debating Vice President Mike Pence tonight. Right after this show is over, Fox Soul will premiere, and we will have our debate viewing party with all of the wonderful sisters that will be hosting it. Brooke Thomas will take the lead, of course. And tonight, it's appropriate that all of the commentators from this network be Black women, because Kamala Harris is going to be on that stage tonight. She'll be the only Black woman, the only Black person on that stage tonight, representing the best of who we are and the best of what we hope to be, and the tragedy that comes along with the American experience, the African soldier in the American experience. I don't have a lot of advice for her tonight, except tell the truth, because not only will it set you free, it will illuminate a nation. And every time Mike Pence lies, which we know he must do, because that's the only way you can defend the craziness that's going on just in the last 4 days, forget the last 4 years. You have to lie to be able to defend this craziness. She just needs to tell the truth. Flat-footed, boldly tell the truth. Look him in the eye and call him out, and do it with all of the grace and dignity and strength, and intimidation even, that a Black woman can conjure and muster. Tonight, all of us who support her and her work and her future, we are praying for her and we are standing with her. As the old adage says, she stands as one, but she comes as thousands, as legacies and ancestors, all of whom will be standing with her tonight, supporting her in this work, because what's at stake is not just the debate. What's at stake is the future of democracy, this republic, what we believe about the premise and the notion that people can govern themselves. We wish her well. All right, I'm done with that until I ask Malcom the same question. Welcome to the program tonight, dear brother Malcom Glenn. Malcom Glenn, you're an entrepreneur, you're an advocate, and I'm glad to have you. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Sean, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, it's my pleasure. Before we got on the air, I made fun of the city that you're in DC, and I said to you, there's a lot going on in your city. There's a lot going on in your city.
There is. I was telling you, I have some interesting neighbors, and those neighbors have been spending a lot of time outside the house, which hasn't been good for the city and hasn't been good for the country.
Yes, this is so true. This is so true. So let me ask you this, Malcom Glenn. What makes you so strong, sir?
Listen, I appreciate the question, but I just try to do the absolute best with what I've been given. I've been fortunate enough over the course of both my life and my career to have had some amazing opportunities, both in my family, giving me an opportunity and instilling in me the importance of going to college, and in my career, having mentors who have made clear to me that there are no opportunities that I can't overcome, and there are just tons of spaces that I can find my way into that I can really occupy and do great things in. And so I have really followed the notion and the adage that I am responsible to do well on behalf of the people who came before me. And I try to do that in everything I've done, whether it's my advocacy work, my corporate work, or some of the philanthropic work that I've been involved in as well.
No, I so appreciate that. I so appreciate you having that sense about legacy and the interconnectedness or the intersectionality, right, of all the generations and all the different struggles across the different demographics that sort of culminate and find their fulfillment in you. And I think if more people, you tell me what you think about this. I think if more people understood their lives in that context, that the fulfillment of so many battles, of finding their articulation in what you're going to do today, we would get out of the bed differently in the morning.
Listen, I think that's exactly right. I always say it as such that our lives are really not our own. We are defined entirely almost by the people who came before us. And so, in a lot of ways, particularly those of us who have had opportunities over the course of our lives, we are responsible, as a matter of fact, to do well on behalf of the people who came before us, the people who sacrificed for us, the people who laid the groundwork for all of the things that we're able to do. So, people compliment me. You say, I am all of these things, but I am in fact nothing if not the people who came before me. So the credit and the respect goes as much to them as it does to me, if not more.
Yeah, no, all I can say to that is facts and more facts. Yeah, and we like you here, Malcolm, because you went to Harvard and a school that I know something about. And had you had gone to Yale, I would have kicked you off as soon as get off the show. but, but yes, you're a Crimson man, and so that's a wonderful thing. And I mentioned that because I think we ought to celebrate Black folks who have academic achievement and attainment and being smart and brilliant is as common to being Black as being able to dance on the two, clap your hands or snap your finger on the 2 and the 4. Black people have always produced brilliant people. I'm not going to ask you about Harvard, though. I'm tempted just to have a whole hour on that. But I do want to ask you, though, what would you call this chapter in your life, like this moment in your life? If you had to call it something, what would you call it?
It's interesting because people ask so much today about how we're feeling and what we're going through. And I actually think the real chapter of this time in our lives is actually going to be written later.
Mm,
We see things from moment to moment, but the reality is the big picture of how today's efforts, tomorrow's efforts, the next month's efforts affect the whole are not really written yet. My wife is an academic, so I try to lean on her thoughtfulness around the notion that the big picture is what helps us define the places where we are today. So um, it's crazy. It's unlike anything we've ever experienced before. But I think the thing to remember is um, we have been through hard times as a country before. We, particularly Black people, we know what it's like to be marginalized. We know what it's like to not believe that your government or the leaders in your government represent you. And we have much more of a voice. We have much more of a platform. There are many times in our history where Dr. Sean, you wouldn't have this type of platform. I wouldn't be able to join you in a conversation like this. So it is challenging, but it is also not yet finished. And we have many, many opportunities today that we didn't have in the past. And so I think as much as I can be, it is my desperate attempt to try to stay optimistic because it is that optimism that has carried us through much more challenging times. And my hope is that when we're telling the story of this time, particularly to the generations that will follow, we'll be able to say this was a blip, but it was a blip on the way to greater prosperity, greater achievement, and a greater sense of unity, particularly for our people. And that's my hope is that that's where we're going to end up.
yeah, no, I think that's rich. I think you're absolutely right. When the tale of this time is told, the future's children will hardly believe that such a time as this ever existed. They will marvel at, at the hyperbolic ridiculousness that we have had to live through for 4 years, and yet it all will be true. It all will be true. Listen, I want to get to your work, but before I do that, one of the things I like to achieve on this show is to not just bring people, my audience rather, people's work or passions, is to bring them part of the individual story. Your humanity, who you are, is as important to me as what you've done. Whether it was at Google or Uber or the work that you're doing now. I want to give you an open-ended way to do this, and then you pick, what parts of it you want to tell me. But tell me about a defining moment in your life that has nothing to do with your corporate background, and just as Malcolm at 12, Malcolm at 16, 20, a defining moment somewhere in that part of the story.
I think one of the most defining moments in my life took place relatively early in life, and that was when my dad died when I was 5 years old. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was five, but what ended up transpiring over the course of my life was, when you're a child and you encounter something so profound, so moving, so transformative, it sticks with you in a way that you can't process until you get older. And so what I ended up realizing, and it didn't end up really hitting me until I was in college, was that there's this notion of delayed grief that can have such an impact on your life. And I had been carrying with me this burden, this sort of unspoken, unarticulated impact of not having this person in my life, not having this mentor, this friend, this guidepost. And there were so many other people who filled that role, but I really struggled with not having that person with me over the course of my life. And it took some real effort, therapy, interrogation of oneself, a struggle. But over the years, I've worked to really integrate both his presence for the time period that he was in my life, but also his absence, really thoughtfully into everything that I do. And I like to think that everything that I do are things that would have made him proud. And so one of the most defining moments of my life happened when I was super, super young. I'm not sure that I recognized at the time how big of an impact it would have on me, but I think I recognize now that it made a bigger impact than probably anything else over the course of my 33 years on this earth.
Yeah, yeah. And as you were saying that, it clicked. I had an aha moment with you, because now I totally understand why you're so sensitive to that generational fulfillment. What is the whole Christmas song? The hopes and fears of all the years are met
Mhm.
in thee tonight. Like that comes, that experience with you losing your dad has given you a sensitivity, right? To what do the ancestors think about me? What does my dad think about what I'm doing? Yes, it's so much. And respond to this, if you will. There's is You don't really understand people, right, until you know something about their story. Till you know what they've climbed out of to get here, you'll never know anything about what they're trying to say.
I think that's exactly right. I was having a conversation recently with someone about who the most important people were in my life. And we were
Mhm.
kind of cataloging who those people were. And I realized that there was a consistency across all of them, irrespective of whether they were people who I met when I was young, growing up in Denver, Colorado, whether they were people who I met in college, whether they were people who I've met in the work world post college. And it was that I shared with them at some point during the course of our relationship something profound and deep about the most
Mm,
important people to me as well. And
mm,
there's a level to which I think the relationships really took on a new sort of aura, or they went to a new level once I shared that with them. And so, I think that's something that we can all keep in mind. That's not something that necessarily you want to lead with in the course of a relationship. You're not sure whether that person is who you want to be one of your close friends. But when you get to a point where you feel like this person is important to me, I think showing them vulnerability, showing them a part of you that they haven't seen, a wound perhaps, is a
mm.
way to ingratiate yourself to them such that they'll do the same for you. And you can really find yourself in some really powerful, spirited, engaging relationships. And I've been thankful over the course of my life that many of the most important people to me have been people who I've been willing to be vulnerable with and who have been willing to do the same with me.
Yeah, no, that is entirely rich. I mean, we could literally spend the rest of the show
We could.
just talking about that, because you are absolutely unequivocally right in my estimation. I think every relationship is yearning to every person in a relationship is yearning to hear the phrase, "Show me your wounds," right? Show me where they hurt you, and I promise you, I won't add to the pain. Oh, that's good. That's good. We got to stop. We got to get away from that. Let's change subjects, because we'll just talk about that
I
all
hear
night.
you.
Malcolm Glenn, I'm starting to love you. So let me ask you a question unrelated to everything we just talked about. Remember, you know what? Let's take a break, because I want to give you a chance to answer this. I want to talk about Google, because you
Okay.
worked for Google, and I want to know, how in the world did you get to Google? What was that like? So let's take a break. We're gonna come back and talk Google, and we're gonna talk a little Uber, and then we're gonna talk about your diversity work and all the great things that you're doing. Malcolm Glenn, everybody, I'm telling you. I like this guy, even though he does live in DC with crazy neighbors.
There's so many rewards in life. You coming into our home was one of the greatest rewards we could have ever had.
Spending time outdoors has never felt more valuable. Whether it's exploring nature or relaxing in your yard, let's do it responsibly. Before going out, check for closures and fire restrictions. Practice social distancing, even when outside and on the trail. Back at home, if burning yard debris, keep your pile small. And no matter where you are, be sure to properly extinguish any outdoor fire. Drown, stir, drown, feel. We're all in this together. Help keep our safe places safe.
Anytime they're playing music downstairs, it's loud. I go downstairs, see what they're doing, see what music they're doing, see what they're dancing to. I go play piano downstairs, they come get involved. Leah has a drum set beside it, banging that. Any music, that's what they do.
Social distancing. Staying 6 feet apart from others. A little thing that makes a big difference. Learn more now at coronavirusnow.com.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking to Malcom Glenn. And Malcom, when we took our break, I hinted, foreshadowed, teased that we'd be talking about your time at Google. And I want to do that. My first question is probably the most obvious and pedantic, and that is, how in the world did you end up at Google? How did you get to Google?
You know, it's a great question. I think anybody's career, if you really interrogate it, is a little bit of a winding road. And I had been working in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. I started out working in political polling and consulting, and then I spent some years working in education reform. And I realized after a while that, you know, the nonprofit space can be really fulfilling, but it can also be really challenging in that so many of these organizations are desperate for resources, desperate for influence. And while they may be doing good work, oftentimes many people are not the beneficiaries of that work. And so I was looking for an organization that had a little bit more influence. And I was fortunate enough to have some folks at a little company called Google who at the time were talking to some folks on a team who were specifically actually looking for people who had experience in politics and who had spent some time in DC. And they were specifically staffing up for an executive communications team of largely former DC staffers, people who worked for administrations, people who worked for mayors, speech writers, people who worked in comms departments, to really kind of help the executive team at Google work through its own version of crisis communications. And so I came on board a number of years ago and led communications for Google's chief financial officer and his leadership team. And it was a fascinating experience because on one hand, it was very consistent with what I had done in the context of my DC work. But the CFO of Google at the time was this very quirky, off-the-wall French Canadian guy called Patrick Pichette. And his claim to fame is that he would ride his electric skateboard into every one of Google's meetings. And so it was this weird juxtaposition in that you had this big, really influential company, but you also had this very quirky kind of off-the-wall culture. And my job was really to kind of mesh the two and deliver those communications to one of the senior executives of the company. So it was a very fascinating, interesting experience, unlike anything I'd done before.
Wow. It makes me wonder, and I don't know to what degree you can talk about it, but it makes me wonder how conducive is the culture at one of these big, tech companies? How conducive is the culture there for Black folks? And how did you find it as a Black man? How did you find that space to be welcoming or not so much?
Dr. Sean, I'll tell you that every space, almost to a T where I've worked, I have found myself pretty significantly in the minority. And there are some really meaningful challenges that come with that. When I joined Google, it was in 2013. And just to give you a sense of where corporate conversations were around diversity, we had never released any information around what our workforce looked like from a demographic standpoint. You look at what the conversation is like now, and you have companies going out and making these really robust and forthright statements about Black Lives Matter and how they're committed to overturning issues of racial injustice in society. But when I joined and when I entered into the corporate world, it was not like that. And so I felt like I was always swimming upstream to get people, particularly people in senior positions of leadership, to recognize the validity and the value of really starting to interrogate the ways in which we were or were not, and unfortunately in a lot of cases it was the latter, doing what we needed to do for Black folks. The countervailing side of that, though, is that I had a wonderful and quite significant community of Black folks at the company who were really in the trenches with me. And so when I felt like I was struggling, there was always a group to which I could turn who understood the plight, who would stand next to me when I got up and put some hard questions in the face of some of our senior leaders. And so in the macro sense, it can be really, really challenging. And I think it's still challenging today, but in the micro sense, if you have that community, you find your real friends and you find your real sort of compadres in the context of a company, particularly a big company where there aren't a lot of people who look like you.
It's fascinating, Malcolm. I was watching something the other day which laid out how many of these companies, the both on the application and the hardware side, the Twitter, the Facebook, the Instagrams, all that, and then the iPhones, how much of these companies were created and are led by, straight white men. And the irony of that is that there's so much of the activism that's going on in the Black community is heavily dependent upon these applications created by straight white men only for the purposes of making sure that our attentions get sold to the highest bidder on their side. It's an irony to the moment we find ourselves in, because Martin Luther King didn't have a fax machine, a cell phone, or Twitter, but he changed America. And here there's a generation thinking that they're changing America, but they're doing it using the tools that Pharaoh gave them that may not lead to the change that anyway, let me check.
No, Dr. Sean, I think you're right. You call it an irony. I think we'd even go a step further and say it is a failing of many of these companies that we have so many people focused on diversity as a means to an end, getting the employees into the company. Whereas the reality is we need to make sure that the platforms we're creating, the technology that we're creating actually benefits our community. And so we can't say, we've done enough just because we have some Black employees, even if we have some Black leaders, but we need to make sure that the practical outcomes of that work, the practical outcomes of the products that these companies are building are also doing right on behalf of Black employees. And I think there's a lot of work across the board for us to do in that space.
No, I think you and I we're making comparable points, because I think the point that you're prolific at is what's happening in terms of within the infrastructure of these companies, right? I'm making a comparable point about people who claim to be so woke while they tweet on an iPhone that they ordered from Amazon.
Sure.
The ironies abound.
There is irony there. That's right.
You know what I'm saying? So let's get to it then, because I think that you went from this work at Google, right, and then you worked at Uber. You did a lot of great work at Uber, by the way, for which you should be very celebrated. Maybe we'll have some time in a little while to talk about that. But I don't want to lose time and not talk about your criminal justice reform work, right? Because that journey alone is interesting. So for lack of a better way to ask it, Malcolm, how did you end up doing that?
The two are related. Actually, my criminal justice work and the work that I did at Uber, one of the early projects that I got involved in when I was at Uber, and I spent 4.5 really great years there, is I went out and started to really kind of build relationships with organizations out in the community who were never shy about giving us feedback about what we were doing well, and in particular, what we weren't doing well. And one of the things that we regularly heard was, hey, you're giving all these great opportunities to drivers, many of whom are disproportionately Black and brown, but you're disqualifying a ton of other prospective drivers for reasons that don't have anything to do with whether they're going to do a good job driving a person around safely. And so through a ton of those conversations, I was enlightened, and a number of other folks on the team at Uber were enlightened to some provisions in California that reclassified a number of felonies to misdemeanors. And we realized at Uber that we could align our driver screening process around some of those provisions. And so effectively, we stopped disqualifying drivers from driving with Uber if they had low-level nonviolent offenses on their record. This opened up a whole host of opportunities that I think was illuminating for the company and certainly illuminating for me. We got invited to be one of the inaugural signers of the Obama White House Fair Chance Business Pledge. As a result of that work, we started to recognize that we had a value proposition that other companies who were involved in criminal justice reform didn't have. So instead of just banning the box, we went a step further and said, we can actually show that drivers with certain records, based on their ratings, are doing just as well on the platform, and in some instances, even better than drivers without those criminal records. We made the case that this is not just good for your brand or from a public relations perspective, but this is actually good for your bottom line business. And when you're talking about the corporate community, that's actually what turns heads. That's actually what gets senior executives to make a change. And so as a result of that, I started to join a number of roundtables, executive convenings, White House conversations around bipartisan efforts to improve criminal justice reform from a corporate perspective, and then in particular from a reentry perspective. So as people were emerging from their time as being incarcerated, how could they get access to things like jobs and housing and goods and services that may not have existed when they went into prison in the first place. And so through the course of that work, I was fortunate enough to be invited to become one of the inaugural members of the Council on Criminal Justice. And the Council is a group of nonpartisan experts from everything from people with lived experience behind bars to people who worked in government to law enforcement to come up with apolitical solutions to solve some of the real challenges that our criminal justice system is facing. And it's chaired by Lori Robinson, who used to be the co-chair of Barack Obama's White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And through that work, I think we're making some real inroads, particularly in a politically perilous time, about how
Malcolm,
to solve some of these issues.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm running out of time, but I want to make sure that we talk about better.com, right?
Sure.
Because I know that's important to you, and it has your heart. So just these interviews go by so fast.
No problem.
It amazes me sometimes. Like, really, I'm running out of time. But tell everybody about better.com, because that's where I want people to really situate you and get to know you and go to find you. So tell everybody what that is.
Well, if you are a person emerging from the criminal justice system, the two biggest things you need access to are a place to work and a place to live. And when it comes to that second point, I've become really interested in inequity when it comes to renting and home ownership. And I started to get involved in this through a fellowship I'm doing with New America, and that enlivened my sort of psyche to the reality that so many of our economic inequities in this country are related to inequities in home ownership. The Black home ownership rate in the United States of America is something like 30 points lower than the white home ownership rate is. You may say that's only one topic, it doesn't really matter, but the reality is if we can't pass on intergenerational wealth to the next set of people, to our kids and to our grandkids, we're not able to build that equity, which will then close some of the profound economic gaps that exist across racial lines today. And so better.com, where I've been fortunate enough for the last 3 months to be the director of public affairs, is the leading digital homeownership platform in the United States of America, whereby we help you identify, purchase, insure, and close on a home in a way that mitigates a number of the massive discriminatory elements that have existed in home ownership for a while. There is a great New York Times story from last month that highlights the value proposition of digital mortgage lenders like Better and leads with some of the work that we're doing. And again, I'm just 3 months into this role, but I'm really, really excited about the opportunity that we have and that a number of the other folks at the company have to really start to close that intergenerational wealth gap, improve access to housing for Black and brown people, and start to create structures that allow Black and brown people to prosper, not just now, but over the course of generations through getting access to things like home ownership.
Yeah, we got to have you back just to talk more about that, because I've done a couple of programs on that subject. But my sense of the matter is that you have a level of insight to that, just considering your background, that would make that conversation even richer than the ones that I've been able to have so far. I want to thank you for coming on, Malcom Glenn. You have such a fascinating professional journey, and you're so affable in your presence. And of course, you went to Harvard, so that helps. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you, Dr. Sean. I appreciate it. And thank you for everything you've done to raise awareness around so many of these important issues.
I appreciate that. Go Kamala. We'll be right back with Kevin Williams and Ronald Eddington, The Book of Sean on Fox Soul.
Poll workers are very important because they help facilitate the voting process.
Most individuals who work elections are over the age of 65. With the COVID-19 pandemic, that is a population that is incredibly vulnerable. That is why I signed up and received trainings to become a poll worker.
I signed up to be a poll worker. My mom actually brought it to my attention. She presented it to me, letting me know that it would be a great opportunity to make some quick extra money, as well as to get to know the voting system. And once I got all that information, I turned it right over to Ty, and I said, hey, do you want to do the election with me?
As a poll worker, it was my job to ensure everyone coming to vote was registered and received the correct ballot.
We go in and set up all of the equipment to make sure when voters come the next day, their experience is as pleasant as possible. Why should you become a poll worker? One, it's a great way to give back to your community, and it's also a great way to see democracy in action.
I would encourage more young people to come out and work the election polls and bring your friends.
It makes the time go by faster,
Sure
too.
Does. It makes a difference when poll workers reflect the communities in which they serve.
Tamika Tiny Harris presents The Mix.
We need the tea. We need the tea.
I've been getting a lot of these sugar daddy DMs.
On Fox Soul.
I had some creepy DMs in the past. Hey, when can I take you out? I'm like, who are you?
I slide in a lot of DMs, but I'm just be sending inspiration.
Wait, do y'all really think that Romeo is really sliding in everybody's DMs?
Yeah.
Inspiration?
Every Tuesday night.
They telling their girlfriends like, ooh, Romeo is in my DMs. Give me some inspiration, girl. I'm about to...
Welcome back, everybody. We get to talk now to the ones and the only Kevin Williams and Ronald Eddington. These two men have amazing stories. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you for having us, Dr. Sean.
Appreciate it, Dr. Sean.
No, it's my pleasure. I was a little thrown off because we were talking about the debate before we came back on the air, and I was laughing, as I often do, at one of my own jokes, because nobody else laughs at my jokes, so why should I? But let me ask you this. I'm gonna start with you, Kevin, since you smiled more than Ronald did with my last joke. Kevin, let me ask you this, man. What makes you so amazing, sir?
Every day that I can wake up without a chalk around my body, it's always an amazing day for me, Doc. Facts. I mean, that's just that I can drop Facts. The mic right now and we can walk away. That sums it up.
Yes, sir. Yes. I love Kevin already. Ronald, we got to see about you.
Okay.
I'm just playing. Listen, so in a similar question, Ronald, what makes you so motivated? With all that's going on, what keeps you motivated, sir?
I just want to help other people, help them to gain wherever they want to in life. That's what really motivates me and gets me up and me wanting to get out and fight every day.
I love it. 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 You know, I'm you guys have an amazing story. There's no doubt about that. And I want to get down into, you know, what happened and how you ended up and where you ended up. But before we get to that, right? Because people like to define you by your worst moment in your life or your greatest struggle. And those things are defining. But I would wager to think, I know this is true in my own life, that I've had other defining moments that people don't know about, right? It's part of the story that people don't really invest in taking the time to discover. And I want to give both of you a chance before we get into, you know, why we brought you on. Tell me about a defining moment, Kevin, that happened before any of that happened. It either affected you positively or maybe even negatively, but it was as much a defining moment as anything we're about to talk about.
Doc, I can go back to my law enforcement days, and I remember at the time my daughter was she was very young. She was 6 years old at the time, and I remember putting in to be off from my shift like 90 days in advance because she was going to do her very first television commercial for a banking institution. And I remember 2 days before the commercial was going to be done with her, my supervisor called me into the office and he denied my request to be off. And so I'm sitting there. I wasn't even expecting that. I just thought maybe he was calling me into the office, getting to kind of shoot the breeze and that kind of thing. And I mean, I was just silent for like 30 seconds, which seemed like 30 hours. And I remember asking him, you know, why now? Why would you do this now? And you approved it, you know, 90 days in advance. And he said, because we're shorthanded and Williams, I don't have to answer any more questions. Get back out there and go to work. It just didn't sit well with me. And so at that moment, that was my defining moment to say, okay, Kevin, here's someone that can tell you when you can be off, when you can't, when you can go on vacation, when you have to return. They can control your income flow. So it's time to think about doing something else. And that's what happened. And how Ronald and I came together is at the time he was a bailiff and he introduced me to an opportunity. He didn't know what was going on in my life, but the timing was right. And I took that opportunity and I ran with it, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah. I want to get to how both of you met and the work that you're doing now, but not yet. Don't be rushing, Kevin.
Okay.
Not yet. But that's a powerful story. That is a defining moment, right? It makes you. It'll make you rethink everything you think you thought or liked about somebody when they look at you and tell you they ain't got an answer. Like, wait a minute, now I thought we were both men.
Right.
Wait a minute. Anyway, Ronald,
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you a different question, and it's going to get us to where we need to go. And here it is. Tell me something that you wish you had known about life or about yourself before you entered in to the situation that changed everything for you. What do you wish you had known about life or about yourself before everything changed?
Well, I probably could say a lot, but try to keep it real simple. With what I'm doing right now, I just wish I would have known a little bit more about financing in your credit score, stuff like that. Because right now you really need that. Credit is king, and if your credit is not where it needs to be, it's gonna mess up a bunch of stuff. Your credit determine pretty much where you stay at, what kind of vehicle you can drive, what type of opportunities you can get. Because if your credit score is bad, there's nobody want to hire you that's like in law enforcement or into the financial realm. They don't want to hire you because you're a risk to them. So I think I would have would have liked to know a little bit more about that, like when I was growing up in high school.
Yeah, which is, of course, something that they don't teach us. And later on in the show, I'm going to give you guys a whole segment just to walk us through how to deal with that, because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But what? So let's get to the juicy part of the interview, because you guys have an amazing story. People look at you right now, and again, Ronald, you were already taking us down the credit and all of that, but they need to know you guys came through homelessness, right? You guys did not have a roof over your head or a pillow under your face to sleep. Kevin, I'll start with you, man. Tell me how you went into the Valley. How did you get there?
So, Dr. Sean, it was the year was 2008, and I was ending a marriage, and so of course, it ended in a divorce. And when I walked away, I just walked away from it all, because sometimes it's better just have a peace of mind than have a piece of property. And so I walked away, and my family didn't know it, but for 2 weeks I was sleeping in the vehicle that I obtained when we was married, and building a business together. But yeah, for 2 weeks I was sleeping in the truck, and when I finally relocated back to Arkansas from Texas, I was kind of shifting my vehicle around because I knew there were people who wanted to test drive it, aka repo it. So my claim of fame is if you ever want to know how to get back on your feet, like you really have been trying to figure out how to ever get back on your feet, you missed several car notes, I promise you, you will be back on your feet. And that's what happened to me.
Because the car will be gone. And I'm assuming, Kevin, that a part of what happened to you was the all of the whatever financial obligations you had to go through because of the divorce, right? Is that what, because you intimated toward it, but you didn't quite tell us.
Well, yeah, well, of course. And so with that,
yeah, I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you.
Well, hey, I'm looking back. So with that, unfortunately, you also inherit your ex-spouse's debt as well. So I was dealing with my own, and then I inherit, the ex's debt, which, it's not supposed to happen that way, but it does. And so from 2008 to 2016, what's so crazy, Dr. Sean, is that for 8 years, I walked around with less than perfect credit. And what's even more insane is that I was justifying bad credit. Like I would say stuff like, who needs credit when you have cash? Well, unfortunately, cash will only get your assets so far. And after that, you're gonna have to start doing something about your credit score. So I had a couple of some more defining moments in my life to say, okay, Kevin, you got to get it together. You can't keep walking around with bad credit.
No, that's rich. And so Ronald, same question, man. How did you end up in your season of homelessness? How did that happen?
Well, it's about the same story as Coach Williams. Had a relationship, end up leaving.
There's a theme here tonight for all of us.
And I actually end up sleeping in my truck for a while, and I also I think they call it couch surfing, at friends' house. So that's what got me there. But it's been a good journey. I've learned a lot of stuff, and the person has also helped me. What got me inspired to do credit repair.
Yeah, because Ronald, perfect segue. Because one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I'll ask you this, and then I'll take a quick break. So give me a short answer to this, because you can learn a lot in the Valley. What did you learn when you were couch surfing and sleeping in the car? What did you learn?
I learned that I can get out of the trenches just like everybody else did. I wasn't putting myself down, but I started educating myself and also reaching out to people who've been there, and they've helped me get out. And so I just want to pass that information on to others, because I know there's a lot of folks out there in the same predicament.
And what's amazing, Kevin, is that, and I think your journey is something similar, right? You started learning about credit and started learning about how to repair it while you were struggling to put a roof over your head.
I did, Dr. Sean, and
I think that's amazing, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I did because I remember hearing this commercial came on. It said, "Bad credit, no problem. Come down to XYZ dealership and we can put you in the car of your dreams." I said, they talking to me. So I got up, head down to the to that dealership. Well, I mean, I didn't drive. My sister took me down. Right. But when she dropped me off, I said, "You don't even have to come back and get me because I'm driving home in something." And I remember that salesman saying, you know, he ran my credit and he said, "Kevin, I got good news and bad news. Which one you want first?" I said, "Just give me the good news." So the good news is we can finance you. I was excited. He said, "The bad news is that now you're gonna, you know, have an interest rate that you may, you know, you're gonna have to deal with because your credit, and we're gonna need, you know, $2,500 down." And the interest rate was what got me. But I had to do it, Dr. Sean. But I told myself, I'm only do this for 2 years. They're gonna only get me for 2 years, and after that, it's over with. It's over with. So I bought that lesson as I was going through the process, restoring my credit, and after it was done, and I, you know, I get to when we take the break, but I did some.
You know what? Let's take a break. Let's take a break right now.
Okay.
Let's take a break right now, because they want me to take a break, so I gotta take a break. And when I come back, we'll pick it up. All right, we'll be right back.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for all that you're doing to help everyone in this country make their voices heard in this year's election and in every election. Your work has never been more important. From the ongoing pandemic to the passion and protests we've seen for racial and social justice, it's clear that we're in the middle of a big moment in this country. And that means we need leadership that honestly reflects who we are and what we stand for. Our job between now and November is to make sure everyone we know understands that the power to make change rests on our ability to cast a vote. Fair and safe voting is going to be more important than ever this year. And that's why When We All Vote is fighting to expand vote by mail, in-person early voting, and online voter registration. Now, I'm going to be honest. We're really going to need your help to make these efforts a success. Luckily, the first step is an easy one. Just spread the word. Make sure your friends, families, and communities are registered, know their rights, and are fully prepared to vote by mail this year or vote early in person. So, go to whenweallvote.org to find out more and get yourselves, your families, and your friends ready to make their voices heard. Let's get more folks across the country trained with the tools, the resources, and the information they'll need to vote, because this election couldn't be more important.
Social distancing. Staying 6 feet apart from others. A little thing that makes a big difference. Learn more now at coronavirusnow.com.
So listen, everybody, we got to wrap it up because you know, our debate party, watch party is coming up. I forgot all about it. I'm here talking to Kevin and Ronald and enjoying myself. But listen, I want you to know that Fox Bet Super 6, if you sign up and play on the app and guessing what will happen at the VP debate, you can win $25,000. So go to Fox Bet and see what happens with that. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We're going to have Ronald and Kevin back to finish the narrative. I love you.